Before we get started, I just wanted to take a couple moments to recognize the types of participants that are here with us. There are people that are watching as observers, and there are people who are watching as and baking along as participants. And those of you who are participants, you were on this Zoom with me, so continue to keep your cameras off and your microphones muted throughout until we pause for those questions. Hello to those of you who are joining the Zoom. Hello to those of you who are watching along on our Facebook page. And reminder, QT Makes is a series that we created at Queens Theatre because we're all sheltering in place at home. And we brought in a few really, really good community members and baking experts for the next couple of weeks. Last week, we had Oliver Butler teaching us how to make a no-knead bread, who's a Broadway director and also a Queens resident and really wanted to do something for the community. This week, you have me. Next week, we have our director of education at Queens Theatre, Richard Hinoyosa, making his grandmother's tortilla recipes. And then the week after that, we have my college classmate and runner-up for this past season's Great American Baking Show, which is the American version of the Great British Baking Show, Marissa Treshelle. She's teaching us how to make kitchen sink or garbage cookies, however you want to call it, with whatever ingredients we have in our pantries at home. So I wanted to take a moment to welcome you to our Queens Theatre online programming, to remind you that every Wednesday at 1 p.m. we will have these classes, and on Fridays at 1 p.m. we'll have our digital story circles. You can find information about those particular programs by going to our website, QueensTheatreAtHome, clicking on the link for story circles, and signing up to be with us. We have a max of 20 participants for the story circles. And also on Friday nights for the next month, our community member and beloved storyteller, David Lawson, who's an internationally recognized storyteller who has done a show at Queens Theatre twice now, will be hosting online digital storytelling shows, 7:30 on Friday nights, free. The information is also on our Queens Theatre website. And above and beyond all of that, those three series, Story Circle, QT Makes, and Storytelling Show, we will be having a slew of other online programming coming out soon, so keep checking our website and social media. All right, so today we are going to make a very, very simple French citrus pound cake. I love this recipe because it was one of the first cakes I ever learned how to make, and it's super, super easy. It's very forgiving. So a lot of baking is very precise, where you have to measure things out very perfectly, and we will be practicing those measurements and things today. But if for some reason we get the ratios a little off, whatever you make in this general vicinity should bake up relatively fine. I also love this cake because it is a little bit not on the sweet side. It's kind of like in the middle of sweet and savory, kind of like a sweet bread. It would be more like a savory cake. And it's very, very fragrant because it uses citrus and because it uses zest. When it bakes up, it just has an incredible aroma, and it's very versatile. This is a kind of cake that you can leave out on the counter for a week and it will not go bad because of all the olive oil in it. It makes amazing bread pudding and French toast. It's just amazing to eat stale. You can toast it in the oven and put some ice cream on it or whatever. Which reminds me, I actually have to get my orange out of the freezer. Today I will be making an orange cake, but you can use whatever citrus that you want. So jumping right in, there are basically three components to this cake. And I'm going to go through, and throughout I will stop and invite questions for those of you who are panelists, just to see where you are, to go on the camera and see how your baking is coming along, to make sure that we're all kind of doing this together. But there are sort of three buckets for this cake. There's the wet ingredients, the dry ingredients, and finally the olive oil. This cake has an amazing amount of olive oil in it. And it's really interesting because olive oil is what makes it crunchy and crispy. It also gives it a nutty flavor, but it's also the thing that allows it to sit out on the counter. You don't have to refrigerate like some other baked goods as much. Now, we say this is a French pound cake. Do I know why this is French exactly? No, I'm Italian. But I think in most Mediterranean or European countries, things with olive oil, yogurt, and citrus kind of universal. My wife is Lebanese, and she wanted me to point out that my discard pile says Jadou's milk carton, and Jadou is Arabic for grandfather. Her grandfather always kept a little discard bucket on the table, and she pointed out when she was asking what the cake is I was going to make, like, what makes this French exactly? Because everything that you're cooking sounds Lebanese to me, olive oil and citrus and yogurt and stuff. And I said, fair enough. So I would say that this cake transcends cultures. And I think the thing that makes this particular cake feel French is that I'm using a square baking pan, so it will look like a loaf at the beginning. So just to do an ingredient check for our dry ingredients, we have all-purpose flour, baking powder, not baking soda, salt, and sugar. And for our wet ingredients, we have yogurt. I'm going to use Fage 0% Greek yogurt, citrus, and eggs, and butter for greasing, and then some stuff later on for toppings, which we'll get into. But I just want to start by basically preparing our pan to bake in. So I'm going to use this tin can bread pan. You can use anything at home. So the whole purpose of this is we're kind of MacGyvering together. So if you don't have the perfect bowls to mix in, that's great. Use what you have. You don't have the perfect bread pan, use a Pyrex. It's okay. Use anything that's oven safe. There are no rules here. This cake is very forgiving. And you could also mix this whole batter up and pour it in a waffle iron, and it makes amazing waffles because there's so much oil in it to begin with. So I want to start just by greasing the pan. And I don't know, I always hate that it's called greasing, but it is. So for this, even though there's no like butter in the cake, we do use butter to grease the pan. And the reason that we do is because it kind of fries in the pan a little bit with the oil and makes the outside really crispy. If you use oil, you can use it, or Pam, you can use it. It just makes the outside crust, which tends to get a little browner, a little bit acrid. So I like to use butter, and we use a quote unquote generous amount of butter. So I've had some butter. Pro tip number one, butter works best in baking if it's sitting out on the counter so it's room temp and not cold. So I've already washed my hands. We're in the time of Corona. Make sure we have our hands washed, and just take our pan and slather a generous amount of butter, probably about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons inside of our pan. Now I'm just making sure that I grease the sides and the cracks and the corners of this pan really well. So once I'm done baking, it will slide right out. So I'm making sure it goes all the way to the top and the bottom and all the way on the sides, particularly pay attention to the corners and the bottom. So I'm going to come around to the camera. So your pan, no matter what kind you're using, should look really, really buttery like that. Like, good God, that's a lot of butter. That's okay. So pro tip number 2 is while we're baking, while we're preparing our ingredients, I'm actually going to put this baking pan in the freezer to make it really cold and to let the butter that we put in the pan harden up a little bit. Okay, it's in the freezer. And usually I'll be cooking in my kitchen, but today I have a bowl of water over there to keep my hands clean in a dish towel. And I'll be trying to keep myself clean throughout today's process. So I'm also using clear bowls today, which is important. I like to bake in metal bowls, just regular kitchen mixing bowls. I don't like glass bowls, but I'm using them today so you can see on the camera what this stuff's supposed to look like. And I'm going to bring it up to the camera step by step so you can see. So thing number 1 we're going to do is mix our dry ingredients. And I'm going to use a small bowl, and I'm going to use a sifter today. If you don't have a sifter, cool, use a fork. I'm going to show you 2 techniques for mixing dry ingredients that you should be able to accomplish with whatever you have at home. So first, we have all-purpose flour. This is just the regular old flour you buy in the grocery store. I've cut the top off to make it a little bit more accessible. And I'm using a 1 cup measuring cup. And for this, I'm using a half cup measuring cup. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to use the half cup for now just because it makes things a little easier. Now, when you're taking flour out of a bag, some people will take the scoop and they'll grind it into the flour and everything, and it really packs nice and compressed. We don't want to do that. Generally, when baking, the best practice is to take a spoon into your flour, if it's in a bowl or in the bag, and kind of mix it up a little bit so it's a little bit light and airy. And I like to spoon the flour into the mixing cup, just a little bit at a time, right? And once it has reached that optimum level, we kind of just make sure that it is level. This is pretty level, but try to be precise, but keep it, I'm just gonna throw a little bit there, but keep it light and airy. So it should look like this, filled up to the brim, but not really packed in there. Should be light. And when you pour it into your sifter or your bowl, it should just spill out just like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that 2 more times. And while I do, I'm making sure that I'm keeping an eye on the edges of the measuring as well to make sure there's no air pockets in the middle. And flour spilling all over the table, and that's all right. I have my trusty kitchen towel that as I'm working, I'm just gonna kind of wipe up as I go. So here's another ½ cup, and then we need 1 more ½ cup of flour. So again, if you don't get the ratio completely right, a little more, a little less, that's okay. But just making sure that it is generally, here you go, level and light and airy. That's good. So the next thing we're going to add to this sifter, or to your bowl if you don't have a sifter, is baking powder. Now, don't use baking soda or you're going to be in the world of hurt. And for those of you who bake, you know the difference between a teaspoon and a tablespoon. And a tablespoon is much, much more than a teaspoon. And essentially when we're baking, this is our air. Sometimes yeast is air. For today, baking powder is our air. On the top of the baking powder, when you open the container, you'll see that it has this metal lip here. And that's actually to help us measure. So what you do is you just skip your teaspoon into there and you push it against the edge, and it will level that very precise 1 teaspoon of baking powder, which I'm going to add to this. And for this ingredient, we're actually going to use 2 teaspoons, not tablespoons, of baking powder into the bowl. I'm actually going to move this a little bit just so we can see, everybody can see what I'm doing here in the center. So 1½ cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and then 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And I just use the regular old Morton stuff and pour it right in here. And salt, you don't have to be as precise with. That's actually a little bit more than I wanted, but that's okay. We're going to pour it right in here. Now, when we're mixing dry ingredients, there's 2 really basic techniques. One is to use a sifter like I have here, which you put everything in there, and you can take a fork and just kind of mix it around a little bit, and then push it very gently into the bowl until everything is sifted through. And it just takes a little bit of a tap, nothing more, nothing too special. Don't over tap it or it will go everywhere. And doing this helps incorporate all of the baking powder, salt, and flour into one airy consistency. And it's really great. It will give you a light, airy texture to your cake or to your baking, whatever you're doing. You can also do what's just the dump method. And for that, because I'm imagining a lot of you at home don't have a sifter, we're just going to pour everything we poured into this sifter into this little bowl. Okay, great. And ooh, let's see, I didn't follow my own advice and got a little bit of flour on the table. And you just take a fork and you just stir it a few times. And I'd like to do cross hatches, so stirring like making an X in the bowl and then making an X the other way and then folding it over. Doing that a few times just to make sure everything is nice as incorporated in the bowl as possible. And also that if you lift up while you're stirring as opposed to just stir it around. So if you see I'm lifting up, I'm lifting up, I'm lifting up, it helps keeps the consistency in the bowl light and airy, just as you would if you're using a sifter. So my dry ingredients now are mixed. So what I'm going to do with these for the time being is I'm just going to sit them inside and forget about them for a few moments. And now onto the wet ingredients. Again, I'm using a Pyrex bowl so you can see everything that I'm doing. And I'll just try to clear things out of the way. All right. So the first thing we're going to do with our wet ingredients is the most complicated step and the thing that makes this cake what it is, which is adding our sugar. Now for this cake, we want to add 1 full cup of sugar, which, you know, sounds like a lot, but actually when you taste it, you'll be surprised at how not sweet it is. And I'm just using the regular old Domino sugar. I also like for this recipe to use superfine sugar, which is just regular sugar that's ground a little bit more finely. And if you use superfine sugar, use 3/4 of a cup. You have to use less. I also don't eat a lot of sugar in my real life, and I tried baking with Truvia baking formula, which is like a mixture of cane sugar and stevia, and it worked all right. But you use 3/4 of a cup of that as well, and it makes your recipe a little bit chewier. The sugar is actually what helps caramelize the ingredient, the cake rather, and it makes it really crispy. So again, 1 cup of sugar. You don't have to be as precise as the flour, but just fill it till it's filled like to the brim. Make sure it's relatively even, and then dump it into a bowl. Now, here's the part where we add the flavor. It's like the first thing that we do. For this cake, I am using an orange, just a regular old navel orange we bought in the store. Time of Corona, I made sure I washed this with soap and water and really dried it off so there's no dirty stuff on the cake itself. And I'm using a microplane grater. Now, if you don't have a microplane grater, you can use a cheese grater. If you don't have a cheese grater, you can use a knife and just peel the skin of the citrus off and then cut it up into little pieces. There's a million ways to kind of do it. But I think the best thing to use is a microplane and any kind of citrus that's big. Now this one's like taking up my whole hand, right? And it works really, really well. It gives enough zest to get into the thing. If you're using a lemon or a lime or something, try to use 2 pieces. If you're using a clementine, use 3 of them. But another pro tip is before you microplane your orange or your citrus, put it in the freezer about 1 hour to 2 hours before you're actually ready to bake. And that makes sure the exterior skin is nice and firm. So when you grate it, you'll get the most zest. And we really want to use all of the zest. So I'm just going to go ahead and take the grater and I'm just grating the zest of this orange right on top of my sugar. It adds an excellent color. It's very fragrant already. And I should say, as we do this, the grates will accumulate on the back of your grater or your microplane. Just take a finger throughout and like make sure you're scraping it all off. We really want to get each and every piece of the zest of this orange into the bowl. Here's something I also want to point out this time. Try not to like grind too much into the white part of the orange. Try to like make sure that it leaves just the zest. And whatever you do, try not to get the juice of the citrus into the bowl. So we really want this to be a dry consistency. There will be a little oil and a little moisture released from the citrus skin, but try not to get the juice in the bowl. And that's really important because if we do get citrus juice in our flour, in our sugar, it will make the cake a little denser and a little flatter when we bake. So just take a couple seconds here to grind the rest of this orange into my sugar bowl. And I'm also going to say that during this demonstration, my wife and baby might come into the door and make a brief on-camera appearance. We're all sheltering in place. We're working at home. So them's the breaks. So if they do, I'll introduce you all to them. But anyway, I've grinded most of the citrus skin peel from this orange into the bowl. And again, just one more time, making sure that everything on the grater is into the bowl. And when you're done, it should look something like this. Now here is the like old school Nona grandmother technique that makes this cake what it is. you need to make sure your hands are clean. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to take this citrus with our hands and we're going to grind it into the sugar. And this takes a few moments. And what you want to do as you do that is you want to pick it up and sort of push it between your fingers like you would wet sand at a beach. In fact, it should feel just about like that. And you're going to keep grinding this with your hands until all of the orange and all of the sugar are incorporated as one, so you don't see lumps, you don't see any white of the sugar left, you just see orange, powdery, fluffy looking sugar. Just take a few moments here. All right. So, and as I'm doing this too, I'm also lifting it up because like the flour, we want to make sure that this sugar is light and fluffy and it doesn't get too wet or too settled in the bowl. We want almost to make it feel like almost like the consistency of powdered sugar, if that makes sense. I'm just going to wipe my hands off for a second. I actually have a bowl of water over here that I'm using off camera. Always wash your hands to show you what this looks like. And when we're done, it should look like this, like super yellow, super fluffy, no sign of regular sugar, just orange sugar. And it looks good. So once we have our fluffy sugar consistency, we're going to add our next wet ingredient to this, which is yogurt. And we're going to use a half a cup of yogurt. And I still have a little bit of, flour in this. So I'm going to take my container, my mixer here, and get everything out of it. And I just like to take a spoon like this. I use 0% because I find that the less fat is in the yogurt, the more fluffy it makes the cake as well. You can use 2% or full fat. Just know, again, like the juice, if you use the more fat that you put in, it's not from the oil, the denser the cake is going to be. So I've already pre-mixed this yogurt a little bit, same idea, and I'm pushing it into the cup until we get a half a cup. Now, unlike the, there we go, it's about right. Now, unlike the other ingredients, the yogurt, if you get a little more or less, like you can see here, I'm not being very precise, it's spilling over the top a little bit, that's okay. And we're going to go ahead and dump that right into our sugar mixture. And again, using a clean hand or a fork, making sure we get all of the yogurt in the container out of the measuring tool. So now I have a bowl with sugar and a half a cup of yogurt in it. And at this point, I'm going to move to a 1970s electric mixer somebody's grandma gave me. It's a total no-no tool, but you can also use a whisk or just any fork from your kitchen to do this just as well. And what I want to do first is I want to make sure, I'm going to move everything out of the way so you can see it here. I want to make sure that in this bowl here, that I am mixing all the sugar and yogurt until it is at kind of a liquidy consistency. So just pardon me while I mix up a little bit. You want to make sure you really get the sides. If you're using a fork, that's cool. But you really want this to look almost like a batter in and of itself. I know a lot of like hardcore bakers out there use a stand mixer. If you're using that, that's fine. Using a fork, that's fine too. That's how the French grandmas do it. But this should be a very liquidy looking, like almost like orange yogurt that's in a bowl, almost like a smoothie. And we want that to be fully incorporated. And you can give it a smell at this point and see that it, ooh, this thing, so I'm just gonna move that to the side. You can kind of like give it a smell and sense how fragrant it is even at this point. That's what your cake is going to taste like. The seasoning that you put into the sugar is going to be the flavor of your cake. So if you're doing any seasoning adjustments, like putting more citrus or you want to do a flavor add-on, this would be the step that you do it. You can put turmeric in here. You can put roasted anise seeds. You could put black pepper if you really want to do a sweet and savory thing. Whatever it takes to make your taste buds happy, this would be the step that you do it. So from here, we're going to add 3 eggs. And I have just organic Valley eggs. You can use the ones in the styrofoam container, whatever you have ability to use. Now, another pro tip is if you're going to bake, try to leave your eggs out in the morning like your butter. So put your butter out in the morning to make sure it's soft before you're greasing the pan. Leave your eggs out a couple of hours too, so they are nice and almost room temperature by the time you're ready to bake. And the best practice for this is to add your eggs one at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and crack 1 egg into this bowl, and then, washing my hands as I go, moving towards the mixer, and we're going to just do all 3 eggs one at a time a little bit. Now, we want to make sure when we're doing this that we're energetically beating the eggs. So if you're using a hand whisk or a fork, you're taking a little bit of extra time here. Okay, the more that you beat the eggs in the egg whites, the more that it's going to be a fluffy consistency too. And I'll actually show you later. I used 2 different techniques for egg beating when I made a couple of these cakes in preparation for today. And I'll show you what the difference looks like between an energetically beaten egg and one that's not. So egg number 2 here, making sure you can't see any egg yolk. That we're going all the way in. And then egg number 3. Ooh, that one fell right out. Look at that. So once the 3rd egg are in, if you're whisking with hand or using a stand mixer or using one of these, just make sure you're beating this until it looks very fluffy. So there we go. So one of the things about cake baking is when you have your wet ingredients, you can really beat them pretty seriously. And when you're using dry ingredients, let me just switch to another towel here. You can't overmix it or your cake will get really tough. So now in this bowl, I have yogurt, I have citrus, I have sugar, and I have 3 eggs beaten. Now at this point, I want to add some vanilla flavor. And I like to add this last because I noticed that when I put it right into the sugar, it kind of liquefies the sugar in a way and doesn't let it get as fluffy as it needs to be. And I don't use a precise measuring for vanilla flavor. I just kind of like take it and put a couple of squirts in there until it seems like there's enough brown in the bowl. Whatever you like more vanilla flavor, you like less vanilla flavor. We just kind of do that. And I'll just give this one more little whisk up. And it changes the color of the batter ever so slightly and makes it a little more caramelly color. And that is totally okay. So again, wet ingredients, pretty consistently, pretty liquidy. And our dry ingredients, which are just in a bowl like this. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to combine the dry ingredients into the wet ingredients. And pro tip for those of you who don't have any experience baking, never ever add wet ingredients to a dry ingredient bowl or it will get super clumpy. Again, you can use a sifter. If you sifted these, you can sift it right in the bowl and use it a little bit. For this technique where we've put it in the bowl and fork toss it a little bit, excuse me, we're going to do this in thirds. The reason we do that is we want to make sure that the flour has enough opportunity to be fully incorporated into the batter without making any lumps. We want this to look smooth, 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 not like a bowl of rice pudding or something. So how are we going to do that? Very simply, take your bowl and spoon it a little bit from above so it plops gently into the bowl. So about a third of your mixture right into the bowl. And then I'm going to take my mixer or your fork or whatever you're doing, and you're just going to take a little bit at a time and just make sure it's stirred up. Now, again, we're going to do the next segment. And this, if you're using an electric beater or a spatula, really, you're going to notice that that stuff starts to build up around the side of the bowl. Oh, my door just popped open by its own. That's super creepy. And what you want to do is take a fork or a spatula and run it around the rim and make sure that all of the flour bits on the side make their way into the swimming pool in the middle. So we're going to get going here. Now, it's also important to walk this fine line here, because if you get this step wrong, you're going to have a really tough cake. You want to make sure that it's all mixed up, but you don't want to over mix the flour, because it will start to make gluten, which are like little magnetic threads that help keep everything together. We all know what gluten is. But like for pizza dough, we want to knead and knead and knead it till it gets nice and chewy. We want to do the opposite for a cake. We want to make sure it's incorporated, but we don't want to beat it too much. Otherwise, you're going to make a brick. So you want to keep it as light and airy as possible. So for this last round of flour, before I could go on the mixer, I'm taking a spatula and I'm just moving around the side of the bowl a little bit, making sure that everything on the sides gets into the middle, and that all the dry flour is surrounded by the wet flour there. So when we mix, nothing sticks to the sides. Okay, woo, that was fun. That's about enough. And again, one more time at the end, just taking with a spatula, anything that's on the side of the bowls, pushing it into the center of the bowl, and swirling it around the side. So you kind of have a nice, cleanish bowl with your batter in the middle. So when you're done, it should look something like this. Pretty clean, pretty smooth. As you can see in here, maybe you can't see, there's no lumps, okay? It's completely smoothed out, and it still moves. It's still pretty watery. So that's the way that we want it. We don't want it to be super thick. We want it to be pretty liquid. Okay. Now comes the final step of this preparation. And I just want to move some stuff out of the way. I can move my bowl. I can move the yogurt. I can move this thing. I can move some of these ingredients. Here, let me just go ahead and do everything. There we go. Nice clean lane through the bowl. I'm done with my stand mixer for a while, because this part you're going to have to do by hand. And this is adding the olive oil to the cake. You want to add the olive oil last. Okay? You need a half cup of olive oil. You'll see variations on these kinds of cakes that say use light olive oil, use vegetable oil, use the full fat, full flavor, extra virgin olive oil for the nuttiest, most robusting taste cake. Robust tasting cake. So I'll just put that over here. Pro tip, when working with oil, before you pour your oil into your device here, your little measuring thing, run it under some hot water. And what that does is it allows the oil not to stick to the sides of your container. It will come out, so you don't have to keep going like this. So just take a hot faucet, run it under there as much as you can, then pour your oil right in and let it go. We have to do this in 2 batches because you don't want all the oil in there at once. So for this, again, full fat oil, I'm measuring, this is a 1/4 cup measure, and I'm going to do this twice just so I can do this in batches. And I'm going to make sure it's filled up to the brim. Okay, trust me that it's filled up to the brim. And I'm going to pour right into the center of the cake as I stir a little bit. Now this step is crucial. You can't use a stand mixer. You have to use your hands. And at first, it will make it look like the oil separated, like the oil sitting right on top of your batter, like a disgusting oil slick. It looks nasty. But you have to stir it a little bit from the sides inward, like swirling. Okay, and as you do that, the oil will start to incorporate into the batter, making the batter look nice and shiny. Okay, and once the oil is all the way incorporated in where you can't see it anymore, you're going to replicate that process again. So again, another 1/4 cup of olive oil. It's full. I'm pouring it right into the center as I stir. And I'm going to keep doing this just for a minute or 2. Now, I'm making sure I'm pulling from the sides, and why we use a flexible spatula for this is we want to kind of lift the batter off of the edges and fold it into the middle. So I don't know if I can really show you what that looks like on this camera, but I'm taking the batter and I'm kind of folding it from the edge into the middle. So from the outside in, outside in, outside in, and we're going to keep doing it until we don't see any more separation of olive oil and dough, and batter, rather. It's not a bread. So by the time you're done, and the other thing doing outside in does is it allows the batter not to get stiff and overmixed. So by just pushing the edges in, it still allows all the flour to incorporate without getting very glutinous. So when I'm done here, you should see it's still a very loose batter. It should look like paint. It should look really orange, or if you're using lime, really green, or if you're using lemon, really yellow, and any citrus that you want, again. But it should look really, really beautiful, almost like pudding or something. It's shiny, it's colorful, it's beautiful. It smells great. From that point forward, you can put it in a pan right away. So I'm going back to the freezer, and I'm getting my baking pan, which has been freezing up a little bit as I've been cooking. The butter's really cold. That's great. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to get this out of the way so you can see. I'm taking my batter, and I'm just taking a flexible spatula, and I'm pouring it right into the pan. And look at it pour. It just ribbons out so beautifully. It looks like poetry in motion, just coming right into the bowl. Just gorgeous. Okay? And again, taking your flexible spatula, pushing it around the edges, and making sure that everything has made its way into the pan. And you can really get this bowl, because the batter's so wet, you can really like lick it clean, so to speak. You can really like get everything out of this bowl. So by the time it's done, yeah, looks pretty clean almost. I mean, not completely, but like pretty clean. So I'm just gonna go ahead and set that aside. And as I come back, I want to do 2 things with this pan. Now, if you're using a round pan, again, fine. If you're using a bread pan, cool, whatever pan. If you're using a Pyrex, awesome. But whatever the pan is, right, you want to take a napkin and you want to go around the edge of your bake. So you see that's butter, I can leave it. But if you see any cake batter, like on this side, I'm going to take the napkin or the towel, and I want to wipe the cake batter away from the sides. So butter's on there, it's good. That helps it lube up. But if there's cake batter on the sides, you want to make sure that it is consistently in there and nice and clean. Now, our batter's poured. So what I like to do, which is not really like here or there, is I like to just give it a couple taps on the ground. And you can see if you tap it 3 or 4 times, a couple of air bubbles will start to come to the surface of the cake batter, and that's fine. I don't know if that does anything. I've just noticed that if you do that, it helps make it a little bit more even in the cook. Again, that could just be like an old wives' tale or something. There might not be any validity to that. When you have a thicker dough, like you're making muffins or something, that becomes a really important thing to do because the dough sticks, so it makes it all even with no air pockets. This is a very liquidy dough, so I just like to make sure that there's a couple of bubbles before I go. Now at this step, I'm going to go ahead and get a knife rather. At this step in the process, you can do a couple of things. Number one, if you like the way this looks, you can stick it right into the oven. If you don't like the way this looks, you can add some fruit on the top of it. What that looks like is I have a lemon here that I zested for a cake yesterday. I'm going to take a knife and a cutting board, and I'm just going to go really, really, really thin slices of lemon, flimsy thin. And I'm going to stick down and I'm going to cut off most of the peel around the lemon, right? And you can do this a few times and kind of get these like nice little translucent shapes of lemon, and you just lay it right on top of the dough. And I can do that a couple of times. Oops, that one's screwed up. My baby is taking a nap right now, and I hear her screaming upstairs. So if you hear a screaming baby, it's because she doesn't want to go down for a nap. And this one's not perfect, but good enough. So little translucent pieces of lemon. Make sure you get the seeds out of there. So I have an orange cake, and I'm putting lemon slices on top of it. And I'm just going to do one more to make it even. And again, you don't have to do this step. This is just a little bit of a fancy extra thing here. So I'm cutting off the peel around the edge as much as possible, still maintaining its integrity. Again, translucent, wiggle, wiggle, boom, in the end. So if I'm bringing the pan over here and I'm showing you, if I can tilt it up, maybe I have to tilt the camera down. Just beautiful batter with 3 little pieces of lemon on the top. Okay, I'm putting this one away for now, because at that point, you can stick it right into the oven. But for us today, I'm going to show you a couple of different versions of this cake that I made. And I want to show you how to put toppings on them. And then I'll take some questions from you all. Now, the magic of live food television. I'm cleaning all this stuff off. I made 2 versions of this cake yesterday, and I'm going to reveal them here. Voila. You can see I'm going to pick one up. It comes out like a loaf. You can hear it. There's a lot of olive oil in it, so it's a little crunchy. It is not overbaked. Don't worry if it gets a little darker on the edges. But as you can see, it came all the way out, and it's nice and moist in the center here. It's still very, not wet, but just like you can feel that it's nice and fresh. It maintains a shape pretty well. It's because there's a lot of oil in it. It's very light and airy, and that's great. Now I wanted to point out to you that I did 2 versions of this cake. One is just lemon, one that has clementines and turmeric in it. And as you can see, this one's high and this one's low. And I'll explain to you why that is. So, 2 reasons. Number one, in this cake, the one that's low, the low one, I put the juice of the clementine into the sugar. And I also beat the eggs by hand. I didn't energetically beat them. I just beat them until they were incorporated. And I didn't take the extra 30 seconds with that one to really whip it so the eggs got nice and frothy in the batter. If you just do the zest and whip the eggs, it will be nice and tall and fluffy. And if you don't, it will be a little bit denser. Both are delicious. Both are valid. I'm sure you'll see a lot of opinions on food TV and stuff that says that one way is better than the other, but it's really up to personal taste. If you like a nice, thick, denser kind of cake consistency, use the juice a little bit, okay? If you like a lighter, fluffier kind of deal, use just the zest and really, really beat those eggs. Then it will get a little bit taller. Now, both of these split on the top, and they tend to do a little bit of a split on the top. If you put citrus on the top of these, I didn't do it on purpose for your demonstration today, but if you put citrus on the top of this loaf, like I did in that other one, 3 sections of lemon or just pieces of whatever, when it bakes, it won't split like this. It will kind of bake consistently on the top. I don't know why that's true, but that just is. But from this point, I'm going to show you 2 ways to top this cake, and then I'm going to take some questions and answer all of your hopes and dreams. So 2 ways you can dress this cake. One is with honey and powdered sugar, and one is with the kind of royal icing. So to show you what that looks like, I'm going to do the honey one first. So this low one that I baked up with turmeric and clementine, I'm going to put honey powdered sugar, and that's just taking a thing of honey. You can heat it if you want, just kind of drizzling it over the top very liberally, no right or wrong. Let it go over the sides. Woo, make swirly designs. And then, take a fork, take a knife, take your hand if you're really feeling brave, and just spread it over the cake. Relatively easy. And it can go over to the crispy sides. It can go to the ends. Whatever you want. My baby's crying. She wants to eat cake. And once it looks nice and glazed like this, very consistently, I put a powdered sugar into a sugar shaker. You can use a sifter or whatever, and you just very liberally pour the powdered sugar over the top of the cake. And when that's done, it'll look like that. Very simple. As it sets for about 30 minutes, usually do this when it's warm. I wait until it's cool. The honey and the sugar will kind of melt a little bit, and it will make like a kind of nice little sauce feel. But the powdered sugar will really stay like that through the duration of the cake. Now, the other technique is just to do some royal icing, which is very simple. You just take a little bit of powdered sugar. I don't really measure it. I just pour it into the bowl. Okay. And I take the rest of the lemon that I have, and I just do a couple of squirts of lemon into that bowl. Now, you don't have to put that much lemon juice in there, just a little bit. Just a little bit. And take a fork or a whisk, and you just start to mix it around. Now it will get a little clumpy, and when it starts to get clumpy, you put another squeeze of that lemon in there, and you keep going, and you keep going until it starts to form what looks like a little bit of an icing. And then from there, it looks like this, kind of like goopy. I take a little bit of yogurt and I plop it in there because it's consistent with the flavor of the cake. A little more. Little yogurt in there. Little lemon juice and a little powdered sugar. And I keep mixing this up. until no clumps are in the bowl and until it's a nice kind of runny, ooey gooey, delicious looking kind of thing. There we go. And then from there, all I do is take it at a higher rate and I look at the slit of the cake and I just very simply pour it over the top. And you want it, it's okay if it runs onto this board. You want it to kind of run over the edges and you can kind of smooth it out a little bit. And it will kind of cascade over the sides and it will make this. For this board, I didn't actually do it very well. I would take a spoon if I was doing this in a non-demo and scoop it up a little bit and keep pouring it over the top. Which I'm going to kind of do because this board has a trench in it. It's a clean board. And it makes like the kind of icing that you would see like in a store, like on an Intamin's cake that's really drizzled. Now you can get pretty and make it a little thicker and pipe it and stuff like that. For me, I'm making this at home for my family. I just pour it over the top just like that. So now I have two versions of this cake mixed up. One is a royal icing, one is a powdered sugar. So what I'm going to do now is just show you what, ooh, that kind of came on the bottom. Show you what this looks like on the inside. So I have a knife here. I'm cutting into the cake. It's nice and smooth. And I'm pulling it out and I'm showing you there's no crumb. It's consistent. It's not burnt on the bottom or the edges. It's still dripping, but it's, you know, it has a very consistent ring and it's nice and even in the center. And what I do with this is I'll take a slice like this. It's very consistent. It's bread-like. It's thick. It's yummy. It is colorful. Okay. And I'm just going to go and get a plate from my kitchen. And how you serve this, any way you like. For me, I put it on a plate. I made earlier some berry compote, which is just strawberries cut up with a little water, sugar, and salt, and I boiled it. Spoon it right over the top. You know, whatever you like. You want to put whipped cream on there? Good. Whatever you want. But this, nice and consistent. Really orangey. Crispy edges, soft center, super flavorful. Not at all heavy like a pound cake, like a traditional pound cake, which has lots of butter and so heavy, and it's called a pound cake because there's a pound of butter in it. This really is very light, very flavorful, and delicious. So again, that's what this looks like at the end. You can put ice cream on it. You can put, eat it plain. You can get crazy and make French toast out of it after a couple days. But the inside of this cake should look like that. It should look like this. It should have a nice brown bottom, but not browning into the cake. If you brown it into the cake, you baked it a little too long. That one came out perfect. And you can experiment with this. So before we go to questions, I just want to say, because we're sheltering in place and we're experimenting, this recipe is really forgiving. If you don't have Greek yogurt, use Dannon yogurt. You can use strawberry yogurt. You can use any kind of yogurt that you have. Just don't go to, like, you can experiment with going to sour cream or something like that if you don't have yogurt. It just makes it a little denser. You know, the yogurt keeps it light. The less fat, the more light. If you want to use brown sugar on the top, you know, with your fruit, cool. It makes a nice little caramelization on the top. If you want to make streusel and push some butter and flour together and sugar and bake it off and then put it on the top of the cake to get like a coffee cake kind of effect, you can do that too. If you want to just chop up all the fruit and scatter it on the top so it looks kind of like a fruit cake, great. If you have bread flour, you can totally use bread flour. If you use all-purpose flour, cool. If you use a little bit more or less flour, great. I would say don't use less oil than a half a cup. You can use more, and the more oil you actually put into it, the crispier the cake will get throughout. So if you like a really crunchy, crispy kind of deal, just keep adding more oil. And in fact, if you want to use it to make waffles, go all the way up to a cup of oil, and then you can use this in a waffle maker, and then it will be the most decadent waffle you've ever had in your life. And if you don't like the topping, cool, you can use it with no topping, no sugar, just super plain. And if you want to put something else on it, go ahead too. For this one that has honey and powdered sugar, it's easier to keep out on the counter. Now, because I use this royal icing one with a little bit of yogurt, I'll probably have to store that one in the fridge. And you can, oops, drop my sugar. You can do royal icing with no yogurt, just a lot of lemon juice. You just have to use a lot more lemon juice. And again, when you're making this, you can do citrus cake, any flavor you want. If you want to use lime, cool. You want to use lemon, awesome. You want to use orange, you want to do all three. I've made one with all three citrus before, and it tastes kind of like Fruity Pebbles, if you remember those from the 80s. So if you want like a Fruity Pebbles kind of tasting cake, do all three, and that will come out pretty awesome. But this cake is super flexible, and you should be able to make it with pretty much any variation of ingredients you have on hand at home. And it'll keep up to a week. You can do anything you want with it. And I hope that you make it and post pictures and show me what it looks like and how yours turned out. So that is the French citrus cake. Now we do have a few minutes left, so I want to make sure that I open up the screen to questions, and we'll go from there.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jay Rogers, and I am the stage manager for today's presentation. Thank you very much, Dominic. My apologies. We inadvertently had the chat function disabled for this event, but we do have some options in the Q&A. And also for the people who are looking for written instructions, we will follow up with an email to send this out. And we also have some prompts that are in the simulcast comments on Facebook as well at the Queen's Theatre Facebook page. In the meantime, go ahead and utilize the Q&A feature here. And if you'd like to actually speak out loud, we are happy to unmute you and provide that as an option. So we have a couple of requests here for repetition on the temperature and timing for the bake.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. So there's two kind of things. If you're using a bread pan, like I just did, 350 for 45 minutes. You have to check it at about 40 to look at the edges to make sure they're not, the edges will get browner than the center if using a bread pan. So if it looks like the edge is getting crispy and in the middle is getting raw, turn down the temperature a little bit and cook it up to an hour. If you're using a Pyrex, like one of those flatter kind of deals, and you want to make it like a sheet cake kind of looking deal, go 330 to 325 and bake it for an hour, low and slow. This cake does not like high temperature because of all the oil in it. It will smoke. So low temperature, low and slow will give the patience what will make this cake turn out. And you'll know it will be perfect because when it comes out of the oven nice and crispy, because there's so much oil and you've greased the pan really well, you should be able to turn it right upside down and the whole loaf should just fall out of the pan. If the Pyrex, it won't do that as well. You'll have to like let it cool 10 minutes and then beat it a couple times and turn it out. But I would recommend turning the cake out of the Pyrex and not leaving it in there. That way the bottom becomes the top and you can ice the top with anything that you want. So again, bread pan, 350, 45 minutes, Pyrex or sheet pan, 330, 1 hour.
We have another question here from Vanessa. And Vanessa, if you would like to actually unmute yourself and speak it, then that'd be great. We'd love to have you do it.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for doing this for us. I just wanted to ask, how did you make that strawberry compote? Because it looks so delicious.
So super easy. I just got some fresh looking berries at the store. I cut them into quarters and then cut those quarters in half. So they became about this size, right? Like a eighth of a strawberry. I threw it in a pot with just like 2 or 3 tablespoons of water. a quarter teaspoon of salt, and a teaspoon and a half of sugar. Okay, and a big old squeeze of lemon juice. And I just literally, you let it, the water on the thing come to a boil. The strawberries will still look raw. And then you take it off of the thing and let it cool. And the actual water will keep cooking the strawberries until they are still maintaining their shape, but they're really soft. And you can also get crazy and add rum in there or tequila in there, your favorite alcohol, and kind of let it cook off a little bit. And it becomes sort of a sugary, boozy kind of thing if you're into that.
All right, we've got another question here from Debbie Bershaw. Debbie, do you want to come on camera and have a chat with us?
Okay. Hi, Dominic. Thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate this. There's two questions that I have. One, I prepared everything, but I didn't have white flour. I used whole wheat flour, and my consistency was thick. It was not runny like yours. So I would imagine it's because of the whole wheat flour that I used.
Whole wheat flour is much more glutinous, right?
Yeah.
So like anything that's more glutinous or more wet will come out like this, a little bit denser, right?
Okay.
So what I would say when you're using a whole wheat flour is use a cup, not a cup and a half, okay? And also try to run it through a sifter if you have one. So if you don't have
I did.
Okay, great. Run it through a sifter.
Okay, but just only use 1 cup.
Yeah, and then when you're folding it, keep folding it up and over so it becomes like you're tossing it almost.
Okay, and then the second question that I have was that in your directions, you said 2 lemons. So I did exactly what you said with the 2 zest of the lemons, but it wasn't as like yellowy as your orange was. Is it, John? And I said, you know what, maybe I'll use 3 lemons. Maybe my lemons were too small, but it just didn't, it wasn't like yours was like your sugar and the orange zest. It really looked orangey. Mine was sort of like a light yellow, but is that supposed to be normal?
Lemons will do that because they're a little bit closer to the sugar color. So lemons are a little bit deceiving. So you'll have to do it by feel. If your sugar feels like wet sand, it's good. Just make sure with the lemon, because they're smaller, you don't accidentally juice the lemon into the sugar and you get that like sludgy stuff. Then it doesn't bake up quite as well. So just make sure you're really making sure that you get the zest. Lemons are challenging because on an orange, the under peel is a different color than the peel, and lemons are a little bit closer. So you have to make sure you don't get all out of the under peel in there because there's a lot of moisture in that. And again, I'm always a big fan of zest. I like to use more zest than normal people would maybe. So I would say zest 3 lemons, zest 4 lemons. For my mind, you can never have enough lemon flavor in the thing. It never feels like too much.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have one more question coming in here from Kala. And Kala, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask, that would be great.
Where do you write the questions? Sorry, I can't. I find the questions, but I don't know how to write it.
There's a Q&A functionality on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah,
but
I'm on
Connie,
question.
if you don't mind, well, let's let Kala go first, and then we can bring you on after that, okay?
Hi, Kala.
Kala, can you unmute yourself? All right, I'll fill in the blank here. So the question Kala has is, where do you put the cake if you don't want to cook it right away?
Great question. The fridge. So just cover it up with some saran wrap and stick it in the fridge. And you can actually hold that dough up to 2 days. So what I will say is if you've really taken the time to beat your eggs, really, and whip the eggs and all that. So if you want this fluffier version of the cake, bake it more right away. If you let it sit a little bit, the eggs that you beat so vigorously will deflate and it will be a little bit denser, but it will still be close in flavor. And now Connie had a question.
All right, Connie, your line is open. Go ahead and unmute whenever you like.
I'll show you this. This is the turmeric that I added into the clementine cake. And as you can see, the turmeric is much more yellow than the regular cake. So this is clementine and turmeric. And if you want to use something like that that adds this really punch of color, do it. I would just say use 1/4 teaspoon because turmeric is super assertive in flavor. So you can get it for the color, but you also get the bull with the horns, which is that really earthy flavor. So if you're into that, cool, this tastes like golden milk. But if you want it to just do a color, a little less goes a long way.
All right, Connie, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, under Q&A, I can just read and see the questions. I can't write one. So I was wondering, what am I missing? What do I not know? Q&A, and it just comes up no open questions, and I get 3 options: open, answered, or dismissed. But no.
Oh, well, Connie, you're up on stage, so you can just unmute and speak.
Yeah, Connie, just tell me your question because we already.
Oh, I thought we were supposed to write them, so we weren't interrupting you.
The Q&A option is available for people in the audience.
Got it. Okay, thanks. No wonder I've been looking all over for ages, going, how do I do this?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries. Other questions?
Oh, hey, Dominic.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you so much. I have a question. I did mine in a round cake pan, so it's like the batter is very thin. It's only maybe like 1.5 inches thick.
Yes.
So do you think it's going to take an hour or maybe less?
I would say probably if it's really thin, like, is it a 9-inch pan or what size?
It's 9-inch pan, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say like start looking at it about 30 minutes.
Okay. Sounds good.
You know, this one, because there's a lot of oil in it, the toothpick trick doesn't work so well. You have to look at the edges.
Okay.
Edges look brown and the edges separating from the pan, it's done. Because it's yogurt and oil and not like butter and stuff, it doesn't stick to the toothpick and all that like you would in a regular, a traditional like American cake.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Got it.
All right, I think that is it for our open questions at this point. But if anybody else has anything, please feel free to raise your hand or speak up at this time.
So I also just want to invite at this time, if you don't have baking, I mean, I do a lot of baking. So if you have questions about how to make other things, bring it up. And if you have suggestions for things that you want to learn how to bake, we're kind of like looking at extending the series a little bit. So you have people that want to make pizza dough and people that want to make muffins and people that want to, and there's some really, really, really good bakers too. So let me know what you want to see and or what you want to learn how to bake, and I'll try to get those things going. There's a Q&A question, Jay. I see it popping up on the screen.
Sorry, I had somebody come to my door here. All right. So we've got a question from Marilyn Williams. Marilyn, would you like to unmute and there we go.
Hi. Oh, sorry. My question wasn't about the cake. It was just adding to your suggestion, like how to make pies or anything like that. That would be great. I really enjoyed this series, so thank you very much. And
Great.
This was fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. Pies we can do super easy. So in fact, Marissa is doing the one in two times from now, like won the pie challenge on the Great British Bake Show. So I'm gonna see if she can do one. Not I can do one. Anyone else?
I think we might be drawing towards the end. It is 2:11 at this point.
Awesome. So folks, if you make this cake, and I hope that you do, whether you use a round pan, a bread pan, whatever, either email it to me or post it to our Facebook page or post it on social media with the hashtag QT, like Queen's Theater, QT Makes. I'd love to see how your cakes turned out, and we love to share the final versions of your cakes. So again, whether you're making clementine and turmeric with honey and powdered sugar, or where you're making lemon cake with royal icing, I hope that you enjoy and that your families enjoy. I hope that you are safe and that you have everything that you need, and that you're in good spirits during this very difficult time. If you need anything at all for any reason, about baking or not, feel free to reach out to us. We are tremendously well networked, so we can find answers for you for pretty much anything that you need if we don't have it ourselves. We're trying to make ourselves as available as possible for our community. And feel free to email me anytime. If you want tips or suggestions, or it didn't turn out the way that you wanted it to, I'll be happy to like back up and take it from the top with you and try to get this version that works really well for your home and what you have. So Jay, thank you for your stage management. Folks, thank you for tuning in. And folks on social media watching on Facebook, I hope that you found this informative, and we'll be doing more. So thank you so much.
Join us next week for QT Makes, where our guest will be Queens Theater's Director of Education, Richard Hinojosa, making his grandmother Josephine's flour tortillas. We've also got the debut of the Queens Storytellers this week, Friday at 7:30. We have all kinds of online programming happening here, so make sure that you check out our website at www.queenstheatre.org. Thank you so much for joining us.
Dominic, you were terrific. You need to put this up on YouTube. The world needs to see you do this. You're really good at it.
Well, thanks. It's on Facebook right now, so we'll have that archive.
Yep.
Oh, okay, great.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and we will make sure that we get those instructions emailed over to you and posted to our Facebook page. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us at boxoffice@queenstheatre.org. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a fantastic and safe day.